home caused by clogged gutters can be devastating.
Or Obama, it might be Obama who's running it, Joe the puppet. I tried at my level, but we needed leadership at the highest points of our government. The White House, if you will, the State Department, they all needed to understand we needed to fight corruption and the flow of dirty money from Afghanistan into Dubai and other parts of the world and such. We failed to recognize that corruption did us in, if you will. It's doing us all in, the corruption in this country. And it's doing the world in. Karen's sentiments echo those of former Congressman Lee Hamilton, a Democrat who served as co-chair of the bipartisan September 11th Commission. Hamilton wrote an op-ed in recent days noting that such cat. And, I find typos all the time in these news articles, and I'm thinking, come on, guys, take 5 seconds to proofread your stuff. Many of his, in recent days, noting that many of his commission recommendations have yet to be implemented, and that America has demonstrated a troubling inability to stop new terrorists from being groomed to take the place of those effectively killed by the military. The United States has also fallen short in addressing the upstream causes of terrorism, Hamilton wrote. Our military and intelligence services are superb at finding, tracking, and eliminating terrorists. Yet it's easier to destroy threats than to rebuild societies. Prevention is less costly than military intervention, but it requires time and patient effort. Karen said the Biden administration's bungled Afghan war exit has exacerbated the threat level, leaving the Taliban in charge of the country and able to coordinate with other criminal terrorist enterprises. On that note, they created the new Islamic State, the Caliphate, and you're going to see on 911 they're having a global terrorist meeting of all of America's enemies. And don't get mad, folks. This is just really terrible what the Biden administration not only did to us, but did to the world. They're a criminal, they are a criminal, organized international terror group, and they will exploit trade, travel, and telecommunications all day long, he said. And they will come to America. They have agents here in America. As I speak, that shouldn't be a breaking news story, but they do have agents of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda is here, Hamas is here, Hezbollah is here. I believe that is completely true. We better wake up as a society because time is ticking. And we're on the brink of another, the 20th 9/11 anniversary, and and I know they love to celebrate anniversaries. And this is a great anniversary for them to celebrate. And one of what's happening in Afghanistan, big anniversary is coming up. You better hold on to our hats and get ready because it is war. Karen says all of the terror threats on the map, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, Iran poses the most serious threat to global security as they pursue a nuclear weapon after decades of launching attacks on parties, refineries, and towers. U.S. Marine Base, the U.S. Embassy in Iran, and other Western targets. They've been working extremely hard at developing a nuclear weapon, he said. There's no question about that. The Biden administration thinks that they're going to try to negotiate with Iran. It's the same thing, as far as trying to negotiate with the Taliban. I mean, you can't sit at a table with terrorists. Totally agree. And these nuclear deals we do with Iran to give them their money and, ship billions of dollars or whatever. Remember that? Yes, Iran. They're going through their nuclear program regardless. But if they can play the game and con us into thinking they're not and get money and be able to trade with their neighbors or whatever, they'll definitely do that. They have that.
First of all, it's not like that. They're just a little real fresh people. Instead, our score of it is 64. Just scan the barcode, sit back, and relax. Until dinner is ready. No shopping.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. I need your help to defend our Democratic Senate majority before this critical deadline. Mitch McConnell only needs to put one seat in order to take back the Senate. We've got no room for error. We can't make this much. So I'm personally reaching out to you, asking you to donate before the deadline to get these dollars to really make a difference. Winning. So, before the deadline. Thanks, Democratic.
I will recommend, you want to know what I think is going to happen in the world? And this is directly to this last article I just read. I write about it. In the book I refer to this synergetic group of people. It's Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, the communists like Putin still embedded in the, from the old Soviet Union and Russia. They want to take their land back, right? They want to. Putin said one of the greatest evil that ever happened to his country was the collapse of the old Soviet Empire and losing those breakaway republics. He wants it back. And China wants to rule the world. Iran wants to restore the Persian Empire. North Korea wants to take over the Korean Peninsula. And who's stopping them? America and her allies. I mean, we are the peacekeeper of the world. We're stopping all of them. So they will come together, and I'm seeing it, as a group, and they want to attack America. They want to, and then that opens up Israel to be an attack. But we defend Israel. Israel's been a great ally and us to them. So if you haven't got a copy, just do read it. The Great Ship of Knowledge, Learning Our Catholic History. It took me 13 years to write this book, by the way. It is science. It's a five-genre book. Science fiction in the opening, the meaty middle of the book is our time here right now, fiction, not science fiction, fiction in that part. And then it ends with science. Great ending, by the way, even though it's probably one of the most horrific pre- and post-apocalyptic books you'll read. But I don't like books and movies that evil wins, and certainly wasn't going to happen in my writing. But I do take you to a dark place, I will tell you that. It will red pill you 1,000 times more than the Matrix did. Just real quick on that. In the Matrix, we were human batteries, right? I didn't like that too. That was a destroyed world. And remember, the one guy wanted to go back into the Matrix because the world was just, it was a really dark and evil place, the true reality. So it's on that theme, but in this story, we're virtually learning history. So we're in a virtual world right now, and we're going to learn humanity's history on Earth, the present that we're in right now. And I think I've drawn out a realistic scenario. It's following world events right now, Nancy. I'm going to tell you that I probably...
Consumers Energy's summer peak rate, you can lower your bill by reducing energy use during peak times. This gives you more control over your monthly energy bill while contributing to a smarter and cleaner energy future. Visit consumersenergy.com/summer rate.
I would say I'm an evil genius, but I thought of a terrorist attack on America that would actually, I believe, work and fool our systems to where someone like Al-Qaeda, these groups, which is exactly what they're trying to do. And this guy sees it in this article, watching shipping containers and all that. Mine was even more sinister than just simply sneaking a nuke into a shipping container. But check it out. I did just just happened to look this morning. This was a review that just got posted today or yesterday. Got my eyeball so I can see. This is from Caleb Bell. Excellent read. I absolutely love this book. the way things are going in this world, it may come truer sooner than we think. And I think that's just a great book. I will leave the link to my author site. It's thegreatshipofknowledge.com. There's 3 ways to get books. The links are at my website. You can get the ebook $4.99, download it immediately. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free. The paperback, which is 500 pages, this isn't a weekend read by me, so print is fairly, not real small, friendly to the eyes for some older folks like me. The paperback there is $19.95. If you have Amazon Prime, I believe it's free shipping. If you want a signed copy, then you PayPal me $25, and just go on the contact knowledge. It says buy signed author copies. And if you don't want to go through Amazon and get a copy directly from me, just fill out that form. You'll email me. Make sure you include your address, and I will email you back with my PayPal, which is BillBailey1@outlook.com. Don't spell one, just number 1. And then you PayPal me $25, and I mail you a signed copy to you or wherever you want it autographed to. But incredible story. You will love the book. And I hate to say it, I'm seeing it play out in real time. And by the way, I think enough of you got to know me if you watch my videos and stuff. I consider myself to be a pretty sane person, especially some of the people I meet out in the world. I should say I'm very sane, but I did have a bizarre dream. It was December 31st, going to sleep, the night of 2008, so the beginning of the new year, and I write about it in this book, and this book was born from that dream. So, every time I've had something, a dream where it was that overpowering. I think that's it. I'm going to end it here. Hey, I'm going to start doing videos, by the way, on this day in American history, because I really like history, and I was going to add one, because there's a great one today. I'm going to make a separate video. I think I'm going to start a separate videos just on this day in history. But today's a great one. I'm going to.
I think you need to get ready. Your mom should be here any minute.
I didn't want to pile it on this because this week we can go on
For church.
news updates.
So pretty much you just need to make sure your shoes are ready. It's like 10 minutes. She should be here.
There's some big things happening.
If you need a drink or use the bathroom or anything.
I see someone got cell phone records and pings. I was watching, I can't kind of made a great video on this, but by the way, go to True the Votive Board. And go to CanCon's locals page and watch it for free. And watch his video last night. And I would also tell you to go over to Neil, the Lumberjack Logic on locals, because he's got the first part of the video he did was really local yesterday on YouTube, but the really saucy stuff is on locals. So just go to locals to Lumberjack Logic and watch Neil's videos there. By the way, Neil is a sponsor now of Freedom Hill Coffee. So you'll be able to get Freedom Hill Coffee from order from Neil. He has a discount code as well. So that's it, folks. God bless you. Keep the faith. I keep saying we are moving this people. I'd like to just chirp it, over, but we're moving the needle in a positive way. And the reason it's happening is because of all of you. So keep doing what you're doing. I tell everybody, there's a 5-alarm fire, right? Everybody's got to grab a bucket to help carry water to put out the flames. So the flames of communism. We want our, individual rights back in our small government. Just the responsibility and a real leader So I'm going to keep it here. Enjoy your weekend, or enjoy your holiday. Have fun. So, Sam, what's on your radar?
Well, there is a new terrifying development in the expansion of the surveillance state. When you think of the Capitol Police, you probably think of them as the police department for the Capitol complex in Washington, D.C. You might not even realize that the Capitol had its own police force before the events of January 6th. And what makes the United States Capitol Police Agency interesting is its jurisdiction. The USCP was actually created by the legislative branch of government. It's a federal agency, and its task is to protect the members of Congress, officers of Congress, and their families. Besides protecting the Capitol complex, which is about 2 square miles, the Capitol Police can also be found in the 200 blocks surrounding the complex, ensuring its security. But their jurisdiction doesn't stop there. As long as they are performing protective functions over members of Congress and their families, which is a very broad definition, they actually have jurisdiction throughout the entirety of the United States. Yes, the USCP is another federal law enforcement agency, and guess what? They just announced their expansion. The Capitol Police are opening up field offices for the first time in San Francisco and Tampa with the intention of adding more cities very soon. What is the purpose? They say they need to be out in the field to investigate threats to Congress. And apparently, according to the agency, deep blue San Francisco and moderately liberal Tampa have the highest concentrated number of threats that apparently need Capitol Police investigation. Now, typically, these types of investigations are handled by the FBI, but the USCP, with their newly expanded budget, thanks to Democrats' overly funding the police, have found themselves with enough cash to expand to the states. Not only that, the agency also is secured from the Department of Defense military-grade surveillance equipment. The new PSSTN units the agency acquired provide high-definition surveillance video and are enabled with night vision. Apparently, the data from these devices can be combined with the sensor data to create a pattern of light analysis on suspects. Now, what else do they have? Not sure. The Washington Times, the Capitol officer, said, quote, hopefully you can understand it wouldn't be smart of us to tell the world all of our capabilities. So who are the suspects and why will some people be targeted? Well, we may never know, because the Capitol Police are technically a part of the legislative branch. They are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. That's right. You can request transparency from the CIA, Secret Service, FBI, and every other law enforcement agency except the Capitol Police. So now we have a federal law enforcement agency with an overloaded budget and military-grade spy equipment that expands strategic offices throughout the country with zero transparency. Anyone see the problem here? And it gets worse. The Capitol Police Chief reports to the Capitol Police Board. The Capitol Police Board is made up of 3 people, the Senate and House Sergeants-at-Arms and the Architect of the Capitol. Both of the Sergeant-at-Arms are appointed and report to the leaders of the respective chambers. So as you work your way up the chain of command, you end up with the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. This means currently Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are indirectly or directly in charge of the police force with zero transparency, by year, and jurisdiction everywhere. For those of you on the left saying, yeah, it's right for your need to investigate and look at what they did, remember when I said the first 2 field offices are in liberal San Francisco and Tampa. The surveillance data more often than not used on liberals who look to append the hyper-capitalist elitist-run society than anyone else. And it's not that I'm afraid of Nancy and Chuck in particular. It could be any 2 hyper-partisan leaders from either party abusing the power of their newly expanded partisan secret police guards. Today it's the left who are hunting right-wing QAnon conspiracy theorists, but who will it be tomorrow? The expansion of these agencies and powers is never temporary. This is the beginning of Patriot Act 2.0, and it stems from the narrative that dangerous insurrectionists are an imminent threat to our democracy. You know, Ryan, I just see this as another threat of weapons of mass destruction and used to expand the surveillance state. And that's my big fear with this.
Very nice to put your finger on it. The idea that the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader would have the sophisticated army and this is really disturbing to people. I mean, let's say you have a Speaker of the House who is, of course, by nature, they're a very political creature. If they wanted to infiltrate some type of protest movement in the opposition party, they could then direct the Capitol Police and say, look, we've been getting threats, whether it's Tea Party group or it's Black Lives Matter, and so we need to infiltrate this group to root out threats to it. And And then once they've infiltrated an organization, what the FBI has shown over and over is that you can then convince that organization to start doing things like the clowns in Michigan. They had like what, a dozen federal agents and assets who were part of the conspiracy with really bad kidnapper or should we? And you were like, oh, yeah, we can totally do it. And then next thing you know, everybody's on board. So, and that's just one like foreseeable consequence of the nightmare of a plot. That is operating as a fantastic secret minority leader. But you could easily think of lots of other ways to deal with them all.
Well, and especially the fact that we don't have any transparency with them. I mean, they're not subject to any sort of, we can't inquire as citizens to find out who is investigating, why is this going on, what is happening. Any transparency, they're not subject to it because of the way they were formed, by being formed directly under the legislative branch. They're technically a part of the legislative branch, and so they're not subject to any of that. So that is extremely alarming. I think that the vast majority of people do not realize the power of Capitol Police, and really you never really have to think much about it. You just assume that there's no surrounding the Capitol complex. But the facts are now, they announced about a month ago that they wanted to expand their offices, and then just the other day they actually told us where. Right? They said, we're going to go to California and Florida, and now they're saying, well, actually now we're in San Francisco and Tampa, and they're going to be expanding those offices with surveillance, military-grade equipment, and no transparency, and like you said, and at the behest of the legislative branch, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. Now, that might not be so scary when they're from two different parties, but when they are from the same party, and especially now, when they're talking about insurrectionists at the Capitol building, and they're using January 6th, and that is my big theme of the entire discussion around January 6th, is that this is leading to the new Patriot Act. This is the new war on terror, the new war on domestic terror, and they're using this narrative. And look, I'm not downplaying what happened at the Capitol. It was bad. The storming of the Capitol was bad. There's no doubt about that. Those people need to suffer consequences, the ones that committed illegal acts. But to allow this to then spin out of control, once the expansion of this power happens, there's no getting it back. There's no reeling this back in.
Right, and what they're attempting to do here wouldn't have done anything about January 6th, and that's always how these expansions play out. There's some modest and small failure somewhere that leads to some major crisis, and then they use that crisis then to expand that had nothing to do with the original failure. So, in other words, it was well publicized. Going to be a giant rally on January 6th in Washington, D.C. There have been giant rallies in Washington, D.C. going back to the bonus army coming, after World War I. And Washington, D.C. knows how to handle giant rallies. You just put an extra couple layers of security around the buildings that you want to protect. Instead, and this is why
she said that she was going to pick up at 9. I guess I got to look at the text. Maybe she's changing her.
A couple of guys at each door, and a couple of those little bike racks that they put around the Capitol. And so, when all they needed to do was call in some people for overtime to prevent this.
What?
To then say, oh, well, actually, what we need is officers in Tampa, San Francisco, expand around the country.
You're right, and military-grade supply equipment. We need all of this stuff. I mean, it's just...
You need to read Facebook.
Right, yeah, it's very, very alarming. I think everybody should be alarmed by this. And I think everybody should also kind of think about the rhetoric surrounding January 6th and say, listen, if our rhetoric, if the public is showing alarm and continuing to say, oh my gosh, this was the worst thing that's happened to our country since the Civil War. I mean, we're hearing these sorts of, phrases from people. If people need to understand that that sort of rhetoric is what gives them power to be doing these sorts of expansions, to justify these expansions. It's particularly hypocritical that this is coming from Democrats mostly that are saying, defund the police, or we want to scale back on police, and then they expand. They overly bloated the Capitol Police budget. And now look at what what they're allowing the Capitol Police to do as a federal agency. And so people do need to, I think about these words. You know, when we talk about things ad nauseum, it just gives these lawmakers power to do things rather than putting that money towards things that are actually going to help the American people.
It's good you're saying that, but the one piece of good news is that even though the squad, half of the squad paid to allow this $1.9 billion to go through, the Senate still has to come to an agreement on what that package is going to look like. So with enough pressure, this could still be rolled back.
Right.
If it passes.
Right. Yeah. But they're still, you know, in their expansion phases. I mean, it's just, it's really crazy. So, Ryan, really looking forward to your radar.
Got it.
Only pay for what you need.
Ken, tell us what's on your radar today. Well, on Tuesday, Jonathan Newman, the CEO of Sweet Green, went to LinkedIn and peddled right-wing narratives about being healthy while fat-shaming people into eating at his expensive salad restaurant chain. Well, at least that's what the social media outrage machine would like you to think. People are livid because in his post, Newman pointed to a stat released by the CDC that people living with obesity account for 78% of the COVID hospitalizations. Newman, who is fully vaccinated and has implemented mask mandates at his restaurant, was calling attention to one glaring fact about the COVID-19 pandemic, that we haven't been focusing on health at all. Newman pointed to the extreme measures we've been willing to go to in order to avoid illness and death and questioned why we haven't been willing to go to the same extreme measures to be healthy. And for this, Newman has received a flurry of social media pushback and has been accused of being fat-phobic and spreading disinformation. He has since removed the post. Now, there is no doubt weight is a sensitive topic. 3/4 of all Americans struggle with weight gain, and nearly half struggle with it on a severe level. Our society has been outright mean and alienating to people who struggle with extra pounds, and the disease is often misunderstood as simply being about people making bad personal choices. And the reality is much more complicated than that. Hormones, addiction to sugars, and an overly medicated society has caused the obesity epidemic to skyrocket over the past few decades. People in their desperation to lose weight often end up turning to fad diets and promises of magic weight loss remedies that end up just making things worse. In the end, many people just give up and allow the weight to keep piling on.
Oh, your mom's
and the
here.
pandemic only made things worse. A Harris poll found that of the people who gained weight during the pandemic, the average amount was 29
Your mom's here.
pounds. If you weren't overweight before,
Love you, bye.
probably were after.
Have a great day. Thank you.
According to
Sorry.
the Journal of the American Medical Association, kids, especially those ages 5 through 11, gained a significant amount of weight during the pandemic, increasing the already alarming levels of obesity in children. So we all have to lose weight. Okay, fair enough. But besides the pandemic causing us to eat our feelings by snacking endlessly, what does it have to do with COVID? Well, going back to that CDC stat Newman pointed out, people living with excess weight accounted for 78% of the hospitalizations. The agency says obesity may triple the risk of severe COVID. There are other comorbidities that can cause severe outcomes. Of course, old age is one of them, and there isn't anything any of us can do about that. But minus the elderly, as well as those who are battling other things such as cancer, the other main risk factors include hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, and coronary artery disease. And all of those comorbidities are related to excess weight. Now, obesity is a global problem, so is COVID. Take a look at these maps. One shows the percentage of obesity around the world. The darker color, the more prevalent obesity is within the population. The other map shows COVID deaths per million, and you can see they look fairly similar. Asia and Africa have very low rates of obesity within their societies, and they've had the best outcomes during this pandemic. And many Asian countries have been slow to vaccinate. In Africa, vaccination has been nearly non-existent, yet they have fared much better than we have. So it really shouldn't be a left-right issue to discuss health and how we can have better outcomes without relying so heavily on medications and drugs. Asian cultures regularly use natural remedies to treat illnesses and disease within their state-of-the-art medical facilities, including during this pandemic. Doctors in China have been using a combination of modern and traditional medicine while treating COVID patients in hospitals. Many countries in Asia either make mandatory or heavily encourage exercise for its population. Of course, weight loss is slow, and just telling people to lose weight is not going to end this pandemic. We are in a situation where we have to rely on modern medicines to help supplement what our bodies can't do because we've spent decades destroying our health as a society. Chinese and Japanese can promote a combo approach because, quite honestly, their populations aren't as unhealthy as we are. We are at a point where we need serious intervention, but we should strive to move away from this necessity so that the next time a global pandemic hits us, we have better outcomes. The vaccines are helping people stay out of the hospitals, this is true, but so is just being healthy, and that's a fact. So the CEO of Sweet Green is right. Despite the optics of him promoting food choices that clearly benefit his bottom line, we should be looking to eat healthy and working out to boost our immune systems. The reality of who is impacted most by this current virus should be blasted on the news so people have a clear understanding of the danger for them personally, rather than it just seeming like everyone is the same. Maybe then people wouldn't be so hesitant to make choices such as take the vaccine or start losing weight in order to mitigate their own personal risk levels. So I'll end with this. Even with the vaccines, the masks, the lockdowns, your personal chance at a better outcome against COVID is much greater if you're healthy. It shouldn't be an either or. So Ryan, I'm going to ask you about this because this CEO was heavily criticized on social media, being called fatphobic. I mean, what is it, do you think, that has created this environment where the discussion about being healthy and exercising, eating right, losing weight has become a left-right issue?
Is it a left-right issue? I mean, I think there's an American tendency that is present in our culture now that goes back to the generation where everybody got a trophy for participating in soccer, in a soccer game. That everything that you do is special, and any criticism of that has been a criticism of you as a person. There was an article in the New Yorker recently about Costa Rica's medical system that was just kind of painful to read as an American because starting in the 1970s or so, and I recommend it to everybody, they combined their public health and their medical systems together into one. We don't do that. Public health is a little side thing that Dr. Fauci's involved with, and nobody had heard of it before this pandemic even came around. And what they did is they said, let's go door to door throughout the entire country and find out what the health problems are of the community and which ones can be tackled with the fastest, cheapest, and most effective interventions. And as a result, they've been able to decouple health from wealth. Around the rest of the world, your health basically is connected to how wealthy of a country you are. Costa Rica has figured out a way to do it that says, no, actually, this person needs iron pills. And we don't need to wait until our GDP triples to get iron pills to her. And when you look at it holistically like that, you start to see what the obvious problems are with the health, the public health of your society, and then you can start to design interventions around that. But we refuse to even look at it. Our system is, if you get too sick, then you show up at the doctor, and the doctor says to you, what's bothering you? What's your biggest problem? What's your symptom that I can deal with today, and then send you back into this toxic society.
Well, and I think that a conversation around preventative care is really important coming out of COVID, to think about what kind of health steps we can all take as individuals to make ourselves better.
And Amanda's blowing up my phone.
One important point, this goes to Ryan's point, is
whenever
when
she
we were
gets
working,
Eric,
I was working
she
in the
just
previous
totally
administration
blows up
on
my
the
phone.
issue of COVID. One thing that we found is
just
disadvantaged
harasses me for about an hour.
were at times most predisposed to COVID.
Or all
and
day.
They do have higher rates of some of these comorbidities, and it's directly tied to income and wealth disparities. So if you're living somewhere that's a food desert and you don't have access to, fresh organic food, the likelihood of having diabetes, of being overweight, of being obese or hypertension are far higher. So those communities ended up being disproportionately impacted. So I completely agree that there's got to be an overarching approach to how we look at both public health and then our medical care. The other point I would make is this, is I think our society and our culture is, listen, body positivity is a very good and important thing, and we need to inspire women especially, because I think we put so much pressure on ourselves to just feel good about who they are. But we also need to acknowledge there's an obesity crisis in this country, and that it comes with so many risks associated with it. And I think we need to be more honest about what's healthy and what's not in terms of weight and in terms of addressing those issues.
Right. I do think we need to separate there has been a culture to fat shame or to make people feel like they're unattractive because of their bodies. And I do think we need to separate that from the health aspect and saying, look, weight loss is not about, because we want you to be attractive. It's because we want you to be healthy. And there's a difference there.
Definitely.
So I think decoupling that would be really important for sure. So, all right, we do have more Rising coming up next.
In 2018, former Obama administration senior official Ben Rhodes published a memoir detailing his years working in the White House, including how the administration addressed the leaking of classified information by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden in 2013.
And according to journalist Glenn Greenwald, the memoir proves that the Obama administration intentionally maligned Snowden and forced him to take permanent residence in Russia, despite desperate attempts by Snowden to leave at the time, saying in part, quote, "It is hard to overstate how dispositively Rhodes' own book proves that Obama's officials generally and Rhodes specifically lied blatantly and cavalierly to the public about what happened, a level of sustained and conscious lying that can be explained only by sociopathy." Glenn Greenwald is here to discuss. So, Glenn, clearly he was bragging in his book, and while bragging, he unveiled the truth. So share with us exactly what that truth was and how he went about doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like most people are skeptical of the media, believe the media is capable of lying, but you really don't get the full appreciation for how constantly they do it, how readily they do it in partnership with the government until you're actually in the middle of a particular news event, and then you just are constantly reading and hearing the government saying things that you know firsthand is a lie, and that happens to me all the time. In the Snowden story, one of the biggest lies was their use over the course of 8 years to malign Snowden as a traitor, as a Russian spy, using the fact that he had, in their words, chosen Russia as his destination. And why would you choose Russia as your destination if you're actually a patriot and cared about civil liberties? And the whole time I knew this was a lie because I was in Hong Kong with him. I knew exactly what his plan was, which was to leave Hong Kong, fly through Moscow to Havana, through Havana, and then on his way to Bolivia or Ecuador to try and seek asylum there. Obviously, WikiLeaks was helping. Julian Assange at the time had asylum with Ecuador. He was living in the Ecuadorian embassy. Obviously, he had contacts with the government, so it was a very good bet. He could get asylum in one of those two countries. When he got to Moscow, he was prevented from leaving. His plan was to leave immediately to the airport, because the Obama administration had invalidated his passport, which prevented him from boarding an international flight, and more importantly, had bullied the Cubans, because the only way Snowden was going to fly through Havana was what they promised to the Cuban government, that you have a right of safe passage. Even if you fly through Havana, we're not going to detain you and turn you over to the Americans, which is a promise that they had made. The Obama administration bullied the Cubans, threatening them to withdraw that guarantee, and when they withdrew that guarantee, he could no longer fly through Havana. That was always what I knew had happened, but you had Obama officials out there for 8 years saying, who could consider this guy a patriot or a whistleblower? He chose Russia. He sought refuge from Vladimir Putin. And so in Ben Rhodes' memoir, he was writing a chapter about Cuba, not about Snowden, so he forgot his lie. And he was boasting of how great his work was in helping the U.S. and Cuba normalize relations. And the story he told was that he had gone to Cuba once he heard that they had offered Snowden safe passage, and said to the high official in the Cuban government, if you don't withdraw this guarantee, there's no chance of us normalizing relations with you. And then he says, I was so happy when I picked up the paper 2 days later and heard the report that said Edward Snowden is now stranded in the Moscow airport because the Cuban government had withdrawn its permission for him to fly through Havana, and he said that showed me that the Cubans were really serious. So
We have audio of Ben Rhodes saying on various shows, Hillary Clinton saying, obviously Snowden is a traitor. He chose Russia as his place to go. And then in his own book, he's saying he never wanted to go to Russia. He was desperate to get out. I, Ben Rhodes, am the one who successfully prevented him from leaving.
The one other move that they pulled at that time was forcing Evo Morales' plane to the ground because they suspected that that perhaps he was on that plane, which reminds me that that Morales overthrown in a coup in 2019. Ecuador's government went through a transition, which contributed to Assange getting booted out. In some ways, was the Obama administration being too clever in the sense that Snowden is now free, still free in Russia. He's not free to return to the United States. But it has successfully gotten to Ecuador or Bolivia. Political events since then would have put him at risk of being extradited to the United States. He could be in a supermax right now.
He probably would be, exactly as you said. They successfully bullied the Ecuadorian government, which under Rafael Correa was a very kind of anti-imperialist government, very defensive of their sovereignty, which is why they gave asylum to Assange and let him stay in the embassy for 8 years. And Correa's successor, Lenin Moreno, was much more pliable and weak. And it was the Trump administration that successfully bullied /coerced /bribed Ecuador to withdraw the protection from Assange, which is what enabled the British police to then go in, enter the building, and arrest him. And of course, as you say, that would have happened to Snowden had he made it to Ecuador, and it probably would have happened in Bolivia as well, certainly with the coup that the U.S. cheered. So, on the one hand, you're right, they kind of defeated their own objective of getting their hands on Snowden by trapping him in Moscow, but they also knew, Ryan, that forcing him in Moscow to stay in Russia would be a big propaganda coup. They wanted him in Russia so that they could try and convince people, knowing, as we saw in 2016, that Russia still has a great hold on the American imagination as an enemy, that it would be harder to, valorize what he did if they could say that he chose to seek refuge in Russia the way Cold War traitors had done for so long. It was just so interesting, though, because they did seem genuinely concerned. They would often accuse Snowden of having turned over this, they would say he has millions of highly sensitive documents about our most sensitive secrets, and they would imply that he turned them over to Russia. If they were really worried about Russia's ability to force Snowden to hand over these documents, the last thing you would want to do is trap Snowden in Russia, and yet that's what they did. They trapped Snowden in Russia, so to the extent there was ever a danger that Russia could get their hands on these documents, we have no evidence they did or could, but to the extent that they could, which is what the Obama administration claims happened, it was also because they trapped him in Russia and forced him to remain there.
Well, Glenn, that's the key point to me, and this is stunning, this revelation, and sound the alarm as much as you can, because you really do have Ben Rhodes admitting they forced him to stay in Russia. But my question, because I admit I'm somebody who is on the side of, well, if he's in Russia, it's hard to not see him as a Russian asset. But you could actually, from the point you're making, say the Obama administration was more responsible for any of the potential data that he had falling into the hands of the Kremlin by forcing him there, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, the whole, insinuation, or sometimes even explicit allegation, that Snowden turned over secret documents to the Russian government or even the Chinese never made any sense for a lot of different reasons, beginning with the fact that Snowden has already proven that he would sooner go to jail for the rest of his life than help a government engage in mass surveillance, right? He demonstrated to all of us that he would rather go to prison in order to defend the internet. So why would he turn over documents that could help the Russians spy? Because they were threatening him that if he didn't, he would end up going to prison. He'd already proved that he would rather go to prison than help surveillance. So it never made sense in the first place, the rationale. There was never any evidence presented that Snowden gave documents to any other government. He says adamantly, and I know it's true, that he didn't even take the archive with him and didn't have access to it any longer, out of fear that while he's traveling around the world, if a government could torture him, he wouldn't have the capability to turn over access to those documents. But you're right, to the extent that anyone believes that might have happened, there's only one entity to blame for that, which is the Obama administration for forcing him into the grip of the Russian government by not allowing him to leave that airport.
And your point about the propaganda value value of having him be in Russia, I think, is a really important one, because even though, as you said, like the Ecuadorian government was under the control of an anti-imperialist government at the time, and Evo Morales was in power in Bolivia, the U.S. government has to know that those are still, kind of within the Monroe Doctrine countries. If he winds up there, at some point in the future, they're going to have access to him, and so, they consciously decided that they would rather not have access to him in the future, to be able to put him in prison, which actually then enables people to valorize him more. If you're a martyr, if you're in prison for what you've done, as you just said, that gives real credit to the bravery that it took to do it. But if you're sitting in an apartment in Moscow and doing interviews on RT, then it's very easy then to discredit him to an American public. So I think that is a really important insight into what their strategy was as it related to Snowden.
Yeah, even in Ben Rhodes' book, He's Still Lying, he says that Snowden's plan was to go to Venezuela, knowing how Americans think about Venezuela very differently than how they think about Bolivia and Ecuador, which, whatever you want to say about Rafael Correa and Evo Morales, nobody doubts they were democratically elected. Those are democratic countries. At least they were until the coup in Bolivia in 2019. The U.S. cheered, but now it's been restored, which is why he went there. And I think, Snowden was always extremely conscious of the government's propagandistic attempts to demonize him. Even now they'll say he went to China. He didn't go to China. He went to Hong Kong. He purposely chose a place. He needed to go to a place that would be safe from the American government's ability to get their hands on him. He couldn't go to Ecuador or Bolivia in the first place because, as you say, they controlled Latin America. So he did need to go to a place where the Americans would have a hard time getting their hands on him, but he purposely chose a place in Hong Kong that is a symbol of resistance to tyranny. People in Hong Kong are fighting mainland China. They're protesting in the streets. They're fighting for free speech and free press rights. And so you'll see all the time when the Obama officials talk about Snowden, they'll slip in, they'll say, first he went to China, and so we've gone to Beijing, to mainland China, even though he went to Hong Kong on purpose. He never would have gone to a country that they could have used to demonize him, like Russia. And so you're right, Ryan, they made so many calculations about that were probably contrary to their own interests, because what they were really more afraid of than anything was Snowden being turned into a hero, because that would inspire other people inside government to discover their crimes and unconstitutional programs and illegalities and blow the whistle. They were desperate not to allow Snowden to become valorized, to be inspiring as an example to others, and that's why it was so important that they would rather have trapped him in Russia with all the risks that entailed, just to allow them to impugn his motives.
So, real quick, and unrelated to this, Ben Rhodes is well known for not having a national security or foreign policy background, but having a master's in literature. So,
creative writing.
How's the book? I haven't read it yet. Is it well written aside from the politics?
Well, the funny thing is, the memoir itself was written in 2018. He has a new book out in 2021, giving his foreign policy perspective. The reason I got that 2018 book, I never read it before, was because there are passages in there about how the military purposely kind of cornered Obama out of leaving Afghanistan by leaking that they just needed another year and 50,000 troops. So I got the book in order to read that part, and then I found the Snowden part. It's a decent book if you want to know how the national security state functions. At the same time, he is a propagandist, extremely loyal to Obama, so a lot of it is just hagiography about Obama and himself. So no, I wouldn't recommend it being as something worth reading unless you want to discover Ben Rhodes accidentally revealing his own lies because of the service to his ego.
Well, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
All right, good to speak to you guys. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.
Buenas tardes, Los Angeles. Ariel began the same top intro, the Prince of Eco Union, the star of common sense. Welcome to our program. Nobody's going to smile because we got time to stay. Here, seat up. I am broadcasting from the beautiful Virginia 5:30, and Norma Linden. And we have one or two people here. Want to say hello to everybody? We'll be here until 6 o'clock. The number is 1-800-225. Welcome to join the Aerial Memorial Squad or Aerial.com. Sign up for a free copy of my award-winning Michael B. DVD for the Second Amendment. We'll be tracking the Chief Director Michael Moore down and ask 3 times how many Americans he's done. 3 times Michael Moore. Fascinating all this stuff. Last year tell us how many people died from secondhand smoke. I'll tell you 2,000 people died from that. I can't tell you how many people are alive. Part of the equation we really don't care about. I mentioned this before. You have parts of the show once a month. We're talking about concealed carry and parts of the postal as our most brass results. And I said to him, how many Americans are alive? I said, it's pretty lengthy. I said, it's relevant. No. I said, it isn't relevant how many people are alive. And I said, if I told you 30,000 people died, you say we should ban it. You got like 30,000. And I said, exactly, it's a car. A firearm has cost and benefit. You know, 2.5 million Americans every year use a firearm to defend themselves. Almost every firearm is just brandishing it. Bad guy runs away. Generally speaking, nobody calls the cops. So most people have no moving idea of how Americans use guns to defend themselves. I'm listening to a debate between John Lott and Alan Dershowitz. Want to have all the show? You're the guy. Just kidding, Geraldo. No such. So, John Lott is debating Alan Dershowitz. And I don't think you get a chance to listen to Geraldo's show this morning. For some reason, I had it on. And I think it's something good. He's a smart guy. Dershowitz is smart. I think Dershowitz, you might not by the way, Dershowitz is one of those left-wing persons who's honest enough to say the Second Amendment refers to individual right to keep your arms, not part of the militia, which is what the Supreme Court believes in. It's before the Supreme Court handed down the decision. And Dershowitz and Lawrence Klein, Harvard, are both left-wing scholars, in my opinion, on the fair interpreting the appropriate that contrary to what individual right to keep their arms. So Dershowitz is not a fool, and I thought it would be a good thing. Instead, I was very surprised and disappointed that Alan first went first, and Alan said, well, you know, we need to have a national study to find out exactly how often people use guns to defend themselves, find out exactly whether or not the presence or absence of assault, football assault weapons, they just have a national study to get down to it. Because we have these professors who claim to know, and they do these studies, and studies are financed by the tobacco industry, on and on and on. And I know John Lott. And I said, wow, what's John going to say? And John very calmly told the person at the time of money from NRA, own research, own money. And Dershowitz also said that if it's determined that not that you, John Lott, is academically ruined. So your whole career depends upon this data being accurate. That's why you did it. Wow. I don't know anything about John Lott's professional career, but I suspect he's got tenure somewhere. And when you have tenure somewhere, it doesn't matter what the answer is to change. Nothing can happen. So I think it's an extraordinary thing to say. And John tried to say, you're attacking me, you're attacking my only why don't you talk about the data? And to have a debate where Alan Dershowitz says we need to have a national symposium, have the National Academy of Sciences look into this, means we haven't done it yet. So why are you passing a bunch of laws when the data's not even there yet? We just now conceded you can know, but you got Bloomberg and Cuomo and all these guys running around passing laws, you just now conceded you don't even know they're doing any good. That blows it away. You know me. Bruce Hutchinson is a distinguished fellow with the Claremont Institute. He's a former staff assistant and deputy special assistant to President Nixon. He'll be joining us in a few minutes. We're talking to him. As you know, Bruce had a tough race. He ran against Barbara Boston the first time. And he would have won the race, but for a 35th of the full the last stage, if I recall that. Bruce was in the head, tough to win the race. And all of a sudden, a bunch of newspaper stories. Bruce Urchinson frequents strip clubs. Single man took his girlfriend and another couple to a club. And therefore, generation should be like. And as a result of being let out in the final hours of the campaign, he had no response for it. And it was very stuck, and the guy that did it was setting credit, by the way, was punished by his own party. Mission accomplished. And Bruce has told me many times that probably the happiest day of his life was not winning that race because he feels that he didn't like it as a politician. I don't know. All I know is again, I mentioned we're at the Richard Nixon Library. One of the many achievements of Richard Nixon was, of course, open the door to China. And a lot of young people don't realize how popular and Richard Nixon was the cold warrior of the old school It started with what's called ping-pong performance, and over a bunch of ping-pong players played China, and that kind of opened the door. The reason I mentioned that is because I was ping-pong player. And when I was in college, I was making money. I would challenge to get my dorm. But we had a large dorm with maybe 1,000 people. We had an intercom that we talked in the room. And I went on the intercom one night and I said, I'm Larry, a ping-pong player, and I was I don't let anybody worry about me. So a bunch of guys come down, and I'm like, that's fine. There's a kid coming down, watching. And okay, your turn. He goes, okay, I'll go. Like, I said, $100 tomorrow, I don't want to bet you. I'm down here to make money, so let's bet. He said, I really don't want to bet you, and let's play. And I said, I'm here for money. I don't mind betting or charging for lessons, but I'm here to make some money. And he was insistent that he wasn't going to pay for a lesson. He didn't want to gamble, he didn't want to pay. So I said, okay, I'll play you one game. I lost that game 21-14. Let's play another one. I lost that one 21-5. Let's play one more. I lost that one 21-2. I said, who the blank are you? He said, do you remember the ping pong diplomacy team that went to China? I said, yeah. He said, I was an alternate. I said, oh! Not too cocky. We were talking yesterday about what Marco Rubio and Obama want to do to have comprehensive immigration reform. And one of the things I said is that would we be having this conversation if the likelihood is that the 12 million new citizens, if the lion's share of them were going to vote for the Republican Party, would we be having this conversation? Would we be having a conversation about D.C. statehood if it were a state and the two senators were Republican? Would we be having this conversation? Would people like Jesse Jackson and others be urging that we grant full right to vote to felons if the ex-felons would likely vote Republican? So let's not kid ourselves here. One of the goals here is to change the dynamic and to add about 4 million new voters to the Democratic side. If you don't believe me, there is a union official with the SEI union. And we have an excerpt of him giving a speech a couple years ago where he talks about what their goals are. You have that?
Yes.
Can you please play for me?
Cut was it?
Is cut 23950. Lacio Medina. He's the executive director with SEIU, giving a speech in 2009 where he's talking about why we want to have 12 million new citizens. You can find that hidden. Can't find it, don't get it. Okay, well, it's quarter after 3. We'll take a break and you'll have a couple minutes to find it. 1-800-222-5222, live right here from the Richard Nixon Library in beautiful River Linda. There are a few more seats. You can come down, and I'll be signing my book, Dear Father, Dear Son. And I'll be signing during breaks. Also, I'll be staying For everybody who wants a book signed, I will be here until 1 o'clock in the morning if that's what it takes. 1-800-222-5222. And I also want to thank our sponsor, James Rennick, from Rennick Cadillac. He is here, and the Cadillac that James has allowed the stage from South Central to tour around in is out there right here at the Richard Nixon Library for you guys to take a look at it. James, you want to stand up? James Rennick. James is a wonderful skeet shooter. He took me shooting. And James, recently, President Obama says he goes skeet shooting all the time. You hear about that? He gave an interview to New Republic and said he goes skeet shooting all the time. So the Fox tried to find anybody who went with him, and he went apparently one time, and apparently he looked so bad, he did it for about 5 minutes, and apparently he knew the end of the gun to point. That's about it. So, James, you don't want to go skeet shooting with him. 1-800-222-5222, Larry Elder. Now, yesterday we talked about a stunt that one of the new five in the Keyhole pulled. His name is Mark Bashir. Did you hear what happened? One of the fathers who lost a child in the Newtown shooting was speaking at a hearing in Connecticut. And this is what Mark Bashir said happened. Do you have that? The one I want is no. The first one when he first started talking about it and said that he'd been heckled. That's the one I want. You can find that. In any case, what happened is that Mark Bashir edited what happened. The father testified and talked about the anguish that he was feeling, and he asked why anybody needs an assault-style weapon. Why? Why? It was a big room like this. No one said anything. Why does anyone need a weapon like this?
I ask if there's anybody in this room that can give me one reason to challenge this question. Why anybody in this room needs to have one of these assault-style weapons or military weapons for high-capacity groups. Now, one person can answer that question. All right.
Please, no comments while Mr. Heslin is speaking. We'll clear the room. Okay, now play the Neil Heslin Bashir edit 23922. This is what Mark Bashir did.
Anybody in this room needs to have one of these assault-style weapons or military weapons. All right.
Please, no comments while Mr. Heslin is speaking. We'll clear the room.
A father's grief interrupted by the cries of a heckler. That was the scene today in Hartford, Connecticut, where the parents of children killed at Sandy Hook Elementary testified before an audience that wasn't always friendly. Neil Heslin, for example, talked about the loss of his 6-year-old son Jesse, who was shot and killed while urging his classmates to run.
Okay,
Anyone against the president?
You can see what it is. When Mr. Heslin said anybody, no one said anything out of respect. And then when he basically demanded to know, some people said Second Amendment. That's all. And then he proceeded to say, I respect your opinion. He wasn't even ticked off. So what Mark Bashir did, he put it all together to make it seem as if these people started yelling, and then tipped Heslin off with that wasn't true at all. If you could play the actual one more time now, how would you know what Bashir has done with it? Listen to it again.
No, I wish I asked if there's anybody in this room that can give me one reason to challenge this question. Why anybody in this room needs to have one of these assault-style weapons or military weapons for high-capacity groups. Now, one person can answer that question. All right.
Please, no comments while Mr. Heslin is speaking. We'll clear the room. Mr. Heslin, please continue.
anybody, anyway, we're all entitled to our own opinion. And I respect their opinions, their thoughts. But I wish they'd respect mine and give it a little bit of thought. And realize that it could have been their child that was in that school that day. And I don't think
Okay, stop it. Now play the sheer edit again. 23922. Look again what the sheer did.
Why anybody in this room needs to have one of these assault-style weapons or military weapons. All right.
Please, no comments while Mr. Haslam is speaking. We'll clear the room.
The father's grief interrupted by the cries of a heckler. That was the scene today in
Andrea, okay, stop. At least the second or third time he's done this. Remember when he did with Ford Zimmerman? Zimmerman is called 911. The dispatcher asks the race of the individual. He then provides the answer. They take out the question. They can see if they volunteered the guy was black. Now, this should get him fired. And if he was aware that the producer knew this in any way, he should be fired. And I think something's going to happen because Martin Shearer was not on last night. Last night somebody else was on. And play what happened, 23951.
On Monday on our program, we aired a portion of a hearing where we heard from Neil Heslin, whose 6-year-old son Jesse was killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School. We have received a number of comments over the past 2 days, so we're going to play the relevant portion of that testimony in full. Martin and many others who saw Mr. Heslin's testimony have called that interruption heckling. Some disagree. He wanted you to hear it in full so you can draw your own conclusion.
Officers in New York, after this controversy, what's going on? This was outrageous. This was an assault. Every bit as egregious as what they did in Georgia doing this. And now it is beginning to be something that people are talking about as to these black and religious ethics. So I think something very well happened this year. We'll monitor that. Maybe just taking a vacation. But all we hear is for him to say that this huge controversy makes things that come into work. So we will be monitoring that. 1-800-222-522 is the number. Coming up next, Bruce Hershenson, the former staff assistant and deputy special assistant to President Richard Nixon. We're going to ask Bruce whether or not we feel historians have been fair to President Richard Nixon. But first with the news, here is Gary Garrison.
Thank you, Larry. Here's what's happening right now from the KUBC 24-hour news.
At the Richard Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California, the number is 1-800-222-522. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show former staff assistant and deputy special assistant to President Richard Nixon and former Senate candidate Bruce Hershenson. Bruce, how you doing?
Great, Larry. Good to hear your voice and good to talk with you again.
Bruce, I was just telling the people here at the Nixon Library about your near win over Barbara Boxer and the stuff that they pulled on you the last few days. And had that stuff not been pulled, we might be talking to Senator Bruce Hershenson. Can you tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
No, I don't mind at all.
I'd like to do a little BMW, a Stanford Richmond and Wine, Bruce, about the liberals, what they do to us, so if you don't mind.
No, it happens in campaigns. The terrible thing is the most difficult thing was it happened on a Friday when the polls were really quite good. One of the people showed me about a point ahead. And so they generally have something like anything. The thing is, you can't say it, and they'll use it if they feel they need to, and they won't if they feel they don't need to. If you go back over so many campaigns, that's a rather common thing that I think the Democrats have done through the years. So what happened on a Friday, the election was a Tuesday. No matter where I went over the weekend, I was asked about it. I had Jan, my girlfriend, with me, to verify what I was saying in case anyone thought I was lying. And
back a little bit and tell us what you did here. What did they do?
They said that I go to the tax fund versus who was the head of the NOW organization in California. So I go to the Irving Night. Well, went to Jan, my girlfriend, and Jan and Jack
degenerates went to CrossOut.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're playing.
You know, a nightclub that had a tip shop, and no secret or anything like that, and it was 12. And so they sent out on a Friday before the election. So that weekend, no matter where I was, talks, discussions, all that, and all that, no matter how many times they asked about it, and I always gave the same answer. But it did a great deal of harm to me, to the work. And they did terminate the guy who did that at the bottom also.
Well, they terminated. They gave him a suspension for the day.
Exactly. Right. They hired him back on the
Oh, you bad guy. You're doing bad things. It was not fair what you did. Thank you.
Yep, exactly.
Bruce Hirschman is my guest, former staff assistant, deputy special assistant to President Richard Nixon. He served with him from 72 to 74. We're talking about how historians characterize the president. Do you think the historic history has been fair so far?
Oh, good Lord, no. It's just outrageously awful.
Matt Lauer question.
I'm sorry?
I said, what was Matt Lauer question where he said that somebody more hammered than the other guy? Go ahead, start hammering.
I'm still hammering it continually became almost a celebration of every anniversary of the Watergate break-in, which the president had zero to do with those that he said emphasis on his political campaign by staff or friends or supporters of the president. They really not done by a president, but they have been done historically, and no one talks about it. And there are no secrets, and there certainly have been secrets that are held east of the Potomac River, but not west of the Potomac River. One of the first things that I heard was about other presidents who I got interested in. Haven't heard anything about it. And even after Watergate, a campaign person for Senator McGovern, who was running against the president, apparently broke out of the organization, strike that word, broke into the president's doctor's office, Dr. Lundgren, and took the x-rays of the president. Nothing was said about it. Zero. The president was not interested in that kind of thing. And one thing that just, I can't take lost to this day is the fact that during that period of time, the country was led to believe that President Nixon was the only president that ever recorded conversations. It was so untrue, and then years later, just a few years back from our time right now, in 2015, recordings that were coming out from the libraries of President Johnson and from President Kennedy, all of these recordings that were made by them. I shouldn't say all of them, because the libraries certainly had discretion over what they would release. The Nixon libraries had no discretion at all. It was the archives who were releasing them. And during that period of time, no one from the Kennedy or Johnson administration who knew about them and said, look, this has been done by our president as well. By Kennedy, by Johnson. In fact, it was done by FDR on a wire. That was before there were tapes. But they wouldn't come forth and do that. It was my feeling. It was one of the first times in American history where there was no former president alive at the time that Watergate really became a scandal in the United States. President Johnson and President Truman were both gone by that time. It was my feeling that if either one of them still lived, they would have come to President Nixon's side and assistance. And I don't want to just keep rattling on, interrupt me anytime you want, but I did mention to President Nixon the day before he announced his resignation that we should let people know that other presidents have done these things, and that the American people could then put it in context. There was no context to put it in because the media never talked about it. And he said that there's a guy who's planning on resigning the next day or announcing his resignation the next day. This was on a Wednesday. He did it Thursday night that he announced it. And he said, no, he said, don't ever attack another president, another former president to defend me. And that's a pretty honorable thing to say, and so I didn't.
Bruce Hirschman is my guest. He's former staff assistant and deputy special assistant to President Richard Nixon. with him from 72 to 74. Bruce, we only have another minute or so. I'd like to ask you this. You mentioned about the Watergate break-in. I remember looking at the polls at the time, and the majority of the American people believed that Nixon had authorized the break-in, even though there was zero evidence showing that. That is the way the media was characterizing this. They didn't believe that. The second thing, though, I wanted to ask you about is this. As I was getting my tour this afternoon, Bruce, of the Nixon Library, I mentioned to my guide that the rap of Nixon, as far as blacks are concerned, is that during the campaign in 1960, Martin Luther King was arrested, and his people sent identically worded letters, both to the Nixon campaign and to the Kennedy campaign. Nixon did not respond. Kennedy did. Got Bobby to make some phone calls. Next thing we know, Martin Luther King was out of prison. And that Sunday, in black churches all across the country, I was in one, so I know it's happened, Bruce. Pastors were saying this story and saying that Richard Nixon didn't do jack, and Jack Kennedy picked up the phone and made something happen. And believe me, there was a huge electoral shift. People don't realize, as recently as 1966 or so, about 39% of black people voted for the Republican Party. That incident caused a massive seismic shift in the way black people perceive those two parties. And when I mentioned that to the guy, he said, there's a deeper story here. Nixon did respond to MLK, and responded to him more than one occasion. And so they brought me some documents, and I've seen them. And so the perception of Nixon in the black community, I'm telling you, is in etched in stone because of this incident that I mentioned. It turns out apparently to have been a lot more complicated than people think.
There are communications between President Nixon and Martin Luther King that were the two former presidents. That was really your point. They were very, very admiring of one another.
I have in my Davy Brown African American Figures Bruce a letter, August 30, 1957, to Nixon from Martin Luther King paragraph. Let me say before closing, I'm grateful all people of goodwill are to you for your assiduous labor and dauntless courage in seeking to make civil rights real and reality. This has impressed people all across the country, both Negro and white. This is certainly an expression of your devotion to the highest mandate of the moral law. It's also an expression of your political wisdom. That's not something a lot of people are aware have.
Oh, they sure are. There's so many people aren't aware of it. That's when you have more vocabulary and what to go into with any number of incidents.
Well, maybe you and I just don't know this. It's never dealt with. Maybe you and I can get a club sometime.
We'll do it.
All right. Love you, Bruce. Take it easy.
Thank you.
1-800-222-5222. When we come back, Senator Cruz squared off with the police chief who felt that it is not the appropriate thing to provide. And Senator Cruz had a very interesting thing to do with Wayne Buckbeer of the NRA. All that. We're at the Richard Nixon Library in Loma Linda. Seats are still available. We're going to be here until 6 o'clock, so come on down. 1-800-222-5222. I am Larry Elton.
Only Talk Radio 790 KAB.
And Harlan is in L.A. Harlan, you're on with Larry?
And I'm really happy you had Bruce Person on as a guest. To have more guests. You're a great interviewer. I've been practicing law for like 20-some years, and I've been tossing around in my own mind this argument about the Second Amendment. And, while I, appreciate the political arguments and the, why you should or should not own an assault weapon, I don't see the constitutional argument. I'll tell you why, and I want to hear your views on this. The Second Amendment is not unlimited. We may argue about the limits that should be placed on it, but it's not unlimited. And we've been regulating firearms in various ways in 1930, which is why we all understand all of the business to do that. And so I'm kind of of the opinion, at least from a legal sense, that Congress, whatever it has the will to do, it probably can do legally, but that, maybe they won't have the will. But I don't really see this as a legal issue. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are as an attorney of 7 years practice before you went into racing.
Right. Well, for Harlan, it is both a legal matter and a political matter and a practical matter, which is why people oppose restrictions on so-called assault weapons. As far as the Second Amendment is concerned, you're absolutely right. There's no right to unlimited. The Supreme Court struck down the D.C. and the Chicago laws and did say that reasonable restrictions can be placed on the Second Amendment. You're right. There's no question that Congress can outlaw this or that, cosmetic security, limit the number of rounds and lists. Congress can do those kinds of things. The question is whether it's good. More importantly, the absolute control recommend it was one now outlaw criminality. Outlaw criminality that fire more than 2 rounds. They always want more. That's the problem. Everyone banned the place about cigarette smoking in the airplane, and then they put the cigarette smokers in the back of the plane. They put the plane. The airline realized that most customers were not happy having people smoking in a confined space like that. The outlaw cigarette smoking. Nobody had a problem with that. Then they go to restaurants. Now you can't smoke in your own restaurant. Then you can't smoke in the bar. Now you can't smoke on Venice Beach. There's never enough of you. And so therefore, if you choose one thing, you're going to say, okay, what's next? Because we already have an assault weapons ban, assault weapons ban in California. With a limit on how many rounds there are. And I have a whole bunch of new weapons that are now going to be outlawed. What are you doing to it? You always want more of it. That's the problem.
I'm not going to opine on the practical aspect of it. But one thing I just think people should be aware of is that, under the 1934 gun control law, you're allowed to have definition of what's unusual or unreasonable. I suppose the president was so inclined to have done changing regulations in the executive extent. But the reason why he asked Congress to do this is precisely so we can have this debate. But the American public understand this is what you said it is. It's simply COVID. It's a practical issue. And that we lawyers agree should be able to come to the agreement. We're not dealing with a legal fight here. The generation down the first call ban, I doubt they're getting up their lawyers for this one. And that's why we talk here about the fighting. They have good points. But this is first and foremost, you said it is. It's a political battle. For one way or another, but it's not a legal fight. I think the lawyers can go great lengths to clarify that.
Well, again, I think you're right. But as a tactical matter, Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America believes that the NRA are wimps. One of the reasons he believes that they're wimps is because they didn't oppose that so-called assault weapons ban. So they should have, and had they done so, we would not be talking about the next step, because these guys, again, never, ever, ever have enough. What they really want to mitigate it's not just some conspiracy stuff. The LA Times in December 1919 had an editorial. Nobody should own a firearm in this country except licensed hunters and law enforcement. No one, because we're too irresponsible. No one. And the guy that won what became a handgun control, was supposed to be the same thing. You do it gradually. You do it step by step. You can't do it all at once. That's where you came from.
But I declare that the role of people like me, who are lawyers and also NRA members, to at least outline what is a proper political. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't believe that we're going to get to the point where people are going to have more than a lot more than assault weapons today. I don't want to take away from the debate about assault weapons. I'm just trying to say that the law is the law, and the law sometimes allows us to do things that we politically do not do. And that argument is simply the problem of lawyers. Like if we have a responsibility to take care of the public, we also have political views, but this is not a legal fight.
Harlan, thank you very much. I've got to cut you off because we have to take off. But the bottom line is, I thought the whole point was crime, combating crime. And if it doesn't do any good, why do it? Because it makes the politicians feel as if they've done something to give people the impression that we're now safer when in fact they haven't done a darn thing. All they've done is make decisions that all of our youth are going to have to follow. The bad guy's not going to follow them. That's why we call them bad guys. Why is it complicated? 1-800-222-560. When we come back, Ted Cruz versus the chief of police in Milwaukee. I'm Larry Elder. Larry Elder broadcasting from the Richard Nixon Library in Yorba Linda, California. The number is 1-800-222-5222. Give them some love, guys. We're going to be here until 6 o'clock. We welcome everybody to come on down. We were talking about the issue of guns and whether or not it makes sense to ban certain kinds of guns based upon their appearance. And it was a fascinating exchange between Senator Cruz of Texas, I think it's Texas. He had a conversation with Wayne LaPierre. Now, it was a friendly conversation because information was given out. Can you play that, please? We're talking about number 23938.
With officers laid off and furloughed, simply calling 911 and waiting is no longer...
Sorry, wrong one, 23939.
This is a photograph of a Remington 750. It is one of the most popular hunting rifles in America. This rifle would be entirely legal under this so-called assault weapons ban. Now, I have a question for you, Mr. LaPierre. Functionally, in terms of the operation of this firearm, this is a semi-automatic firearm. You pull the trigger once, one bullet comes out. Is the operational firing mechanism in this firearm materially different from the so-called assault weapons ban that this bill is targeting?
No, it's not.
Now, what the assault weapons ban instead targets are cosmetic features. So, for example, I am holding in my hand a pistol grip. Under this proposed legislation, if this piece of plastic, this pistol grip, were attached to this rifle, it would suddenly become a banned assault weapon. Now, I would ask you, Mr. LaPierre, are you aware of any evidence to suggest that attaching a piece of plastic to this rifle would make it in any way whatsoever even slightly more dangerous?
That's the problem with the whole bill that Senator Feinstein introduced is it's based on falsehoods to people that do not understand firearms. To convince them that the performance characteristics of guns that they are trying to ban through that bill are different than the performance characteristics that they're not trying to ban. They make bigger holes, they're rapid fire, they spray bullets, they're more powerful, they're heavy armor. All of that is simply not true. I mean, the AR-15 that people uses a 223, and then I hear that in the media all the time, and people say, well, no deer hunter would use something that powerful. I mean, 243s, 270s, 25-06, 30-06, 308, dozens of other calibers used in hunting are more powerful. I mean,
so let me make sure I understand that right. This steer rifle, which is entirely legal and is used by millions of Americans, is sold in the identical caliber as the so-called assault weapons ban, although those look scarier because they have a piece of plastic attached.
And the Ruger Mini 14, which Senator Feinstein exempts in her bill, uses 223. The AR-15, which has the handle on the bottom, which is prohibited, also uses the exact same.
Okay, I'm out of time. I want to make one final point, if I may, because there has been much attention drawn to gun shows, and indeed the statistic of 40% has been bandied about. Now, that statistic is unfortunately based on a study that occurred before the background check went into effect, and so it is a highly dubious figure. But I do want to point to what the Department of Justice has said, which is in slide 5. The Department of Justice has said that firearms used in crimes, 1.9% of those firearms come from gun shows. So again, in response to this crime, this body does not act to enact anti-crime legislation to prevent violent crimes. Instead, it targets 1.9% of the guns, and a substantial portion of those guns were sold by licensed firearms dealers who already conducted a background check. So even that 1.9%, a substantial portion, are already subject to a background check.
Now, Harlan's point, the lawyer called me, is that the Second Amendment is not a unlimited right. It's not, no right is unlimited. And that Congress can pass a bunch of measures, and they can. Harlan is also conceding that you can pass a bunch of measures, and those measures can be enacted and has absolutely no effect at all. In other words, Congress can do stupid things. There's no law against that. When the assault weapons ban expired, nothing happened. Suspected crime has gone up. In New York last year, there were about 300 murders or And so I've got a very good buddy with the LAPD, his service weapon is a Glock 9mm, carries, I think, 15 rounds with one in the chamber. So that would be legal. But a clip, long arm, magazine clip for him to have no more than 10 rounds. But a firearm, handgun, is 16. Does that make any sense? This is what we're talking about. John Lott was also talking about background check. It's the kind of thing where that is probably the issue where you can find some overlap. Many people who are anti-Second Amendment believe that every single gun purchase should have a background check. There are some on the other side who have, I think, enforcing on law. It won't do any good. It'll subject more people to more costs, more regulations, more rules. Bad guys are not going to submit themselves to a background check. And the perception is that something like 2 million denied by firearms to the background check. They say that all the time. Let's talk about it. 33940 is Senator Cruz swearing off with the Baltimore County Police Chief on guns. At the end of it, you'll hear the chief say, the 2 million people have denied the ability to buy guns to the background check.
I wanted to ask a question of Chief Johnson. Your testimony here today was some tension with what I have heard from police officers serving the ground in the state of Texas, namely that your testimony, as I understand it, was that in your judgment, stricter gun control laws would prove effective in limiting crime. And the data I have seen suggests that
the chief is, like most brass, he's in favor of further gun control laws. That's because he's a politician. They're all politicians at this level. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I'm just saying they're politicians. But if you talk to rank and file cops, overwhelming majority want Americans to be able to get firearms, protect themselves. Overwhelming majority of rank and file cops want to get a permit to carry a weapon. Now, what's fascinating about this is that when we look at how people in rank professions, like, don't like, lawyers, or something down here, up here, military, law enforcement, doctors. Okay? If the majority of law enforcement believe that they're responsible enough to be able to use firearms, protect themselves, get a permit to carry skills, shouldn't listen to them. I thought we respected them. Similarly with doctors, on Obamacare, I know it's a stretch, but Obamacare is passed. And, he brings a bunch of doctors and hands out white lab coats in the Rose Garden because most doctors don't walk around with white lab coats. So he gives them out because the nice photo op is by doctors. So you see a picture the next day and he's going to press all these doctors in the Rose Garden like this, all their white coats on, giving the impression doctors support Obamacare. Well, it turns out 2/3 of doctors despise Obamacare. People were minority. AMA is an organization that does not represent the majority of doctors. The majority of doctors don't belong with it. Because they're too liberal. So, you look at list of professions that people respect. Doctors are right up there. So the majority of doctors are saying Obamacare is crap. Obama doesn't care. The majority of law enforcement personnel are saying people should be able to carry concealed weapons. Obama doesn't care. This is what I mean by arrogance. I don't mean ego. You have to have an ego to be president of the United States. I'm going to run to be the most powerful person in the world and I don't have an ego? Come on. I'm talking about having an opinion where you have zero expertise and where the people who do have the expertise are telling you you're wrong and you do it anyway. That blows my mind. The medical profession is complicated. Every person is different, individuals. I've had lots of people, my friends who are doctors, and you're going to put it under the command and control of the federal government? I mean, it just blows the mind when the majority of doctors despise and say, I'm going to retire early, I'm going to cut back, I'm not going to take Medicare or Medicaid patients. They're telling you this and you do it anyway. That's what I mean by arrogance. 1-800-222-5222. Now, regarding background checks, you continue the thing, and I want you to pay attention to what the police officer is saying about the number of Americans who have been denied the right to buy a firearm. Continue, please.
Evidence does not support it. If one looks in the District of Columbia, which had the strictest gun control laws in the country and banned firearms, we saw that when the ban was implemented in 1976, there were fewer than 200 homicides. That rose to over 350 in 1988 and to over 450 in in 1993. That pattern is reflected across major urban centers, those urban centers that have the strictest gun bans. For example, the city of Chicago, unfortunately suffers from, according to the latest statistics, 15.9 murders per 100,000 citizens. Your city, the city of Baltimore, has 31.3 murders per 100,000 citizens. That contrasts with other major urban areas, such as my hometown of Houston, which does not have strict gun control laws like the jurisdictions I was talking about, that has a murder rate of 9.2 per 100,000, one-third of Baltimore's. And in fact, the city of Austin, our capital, has a murder rate of 3.5 per 100,000, one-tenth that of Baltimore's. And so my question to you is, in light of the evidence, what empirical data supports your contention that restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens to possess firearms would decrease crime rather than making them more vulnerable to violent criminals, which is what I would suggest the data indicates has happened when it's been done?
We know that nearly 2 million prohibited purchasers were stopped from obtaining their firearms 1994 to 2009. Senator, I would tell you that your homicide statistics would be much greater. Often this for this conversation is the medical intervention that takes place today at the EMT level, the field.
You heard him say 2 million people have been denied the right to get firearms in the background check. We come back. John Lott will comment on that. 1-800-222-5222. Larry Elder from the beautiful Richard Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. We're going to be here until 6 o'clock. Come on down. 1-800-222-5222. I am Larry Elder. We're here until 6 o'clock. Longer if necessary for you to sign every copy of Dear Father, Dear Son that you want me to sign, I will be here. Last time I was here with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and I signed books until midnight. And so if there are people who want me to sign, and you're willing to say, I'm here. Why people stay in line is beyond me, but if you can do it, I can do it. I was just telling somebody, I recall staying in line for a long time in my life just once. And one time I stayed in line 3 hours to see Elvis Presley. He was performing at the Hilton, and I saw him. He was opened up by the Inspirations. It was a great concert. The other time I stayed in line 2 hours for a King's hot dog. So there you are. The number is 1-800-222-5222. Now, who left the Baltimore County Police Chief was telling Senator Ted Cruz of Texas the reason we want these gun laws is because the background check has stopped 2 million felons and other people that shouldn't get firearms getting them. Therefore, if we have universal background checks, wouldn't that mean that even more bad people would not have a firearm? And John Lott has mentioned, before I placed John Lott cut on background check. Also, it's true that you should not have tried for the should not have tried to purchase a gun. 2 million people tried and flunked the background check. Why don't we have 2 million arrests? Or something close to it? Where is the trend? It turns out that they're very few arrests for reasons that John Lott will explain in a moment. By the way, my producer, Military Head, putting up with me. We have a love-hate relationship. I love her, she hates me, so it's working out well. We're streaming live from the Nixon Library, so you can go to LarryOver.com or JVSmith.com, click on the link, live webcast. Okay. Now, John Lott was talking about the alleged 2 million people that supposedly were denied the ability to buy firearms. However, when John Lott explains exactly what happened, it's a little less impressive than it sounds like. 23941, please.
You look at something like background checks. Sure, a lot of people feel better knowing that their background checks, but there's really just not anything that I know of by criminologists or economists to find that background checks reduce violent crime. You'll hear claims that maybe 1.8 million people were denied being able to purchase a gun, at least initially, or initially reported there. 99.9+% of that are false positives, kind of like Ted Kennedy on the no-fly list when he wasn't allowed to fly. So you have a lot of people who
Because most of those are not what you call career criminals. Who are effectively something. Somebody who's tried to buy a gun 30 years ago. 40 years ago. Didn't realize that it's years to get on their record. So then they just go in and buy a gun. So there's never a threat. If you look at the law and the law like that, it's time to cost. People who falsely get denied being buying this barefoot. And so, you have to balance the cost and benefits. I suppose, let's say, a lot of people feel good about that drug status. Like, you get some forward and some supply. But you have to realize that more people than actually benefit.
John Lodge, difficult word on the I love John Lodge a long time. John Lodge initially was not area where they would come in and John discovered find out where they're not he only got that only started to be able to prove that more than everyone went for the state of and that's why I respect him.
I'm like, I'm falling.
In fact, one of the things that John Locke said, I have no idea what I do.
Yeah, sorry about that, Gene. Just try to get in there and get some kills and parts. I just built this car, so it's a little awkward. Sorry.
So first with the tax number, and being a so-called
Working on it.
I never did. Normally, whether or not you're not making money with anybody, or and that's the kind of common thing you find from people on the the point Bob was making was, yes, 2 million people were initially turned down, but of that 2 million, most of them were administrative mistakes. Those people got fired. The question is, out of those 2 million, how many ultimately were rejected? And the answer is they don't know. But this guy goes on and on. So what they've done is have a gun show, selling stuff, why would anybody go to a gun show and purchase an old firearm from a person? That's exactly what they wanted.